I'm sure that every one of us have been wondering at some point what creativity really is. And I will ask each and every one of you to, through these 3 talks, focus on how you would define creativity. Now, if we want to find the source of creativity, we would have to start from the beginningless beginning. We have to start at the point where the universe is about to be emanated. And he says that it arises out of an impulse from absolute compassion, or Kamadeva. And as it is said here in Rig Veda, desire first arose in it, which was the primal germ of mind, and which sages, searching with their intellect, have discovered in their heart to be the bond which connects entity with non-entity. So it seems that creativity has to do with being able to bring forth that which is non-entity and making it into entity to create that bond. Let's see if I can get the next picture going. Here it comes. So this is a painting from one of the pioneers within abstract art, Hilma af Klint, and also an ardent student of theosophy and esoteric teachings. And she created a series of paintings that she called Paintings of the Temple. This is one of the altar pieces. And this is her way of describing how a universe comes into activity or manifestation. We have the dark black background, which symbolizes the ever unknowable. We have the golden solar disk, which symbolizes the oneness of everything. And from that oneness emerges the universal consciousness, which we all belong to. And then you see the 7 different rays of the Dhyani Buddhic creative forces springing out of this center. So the Dhyani Buddhic forces, or you could say what we call the Lord of Meditations, is what is the real essence of creativity. And these potentials is what every one of us have in our heart. So we could say that the ultimate seed of creativity is that Kamadevic impulse. It is that capacity, the potential to realize complete compassion in each one of us. And in the Buddhist tradition, it is beautifully expressed in the bodhicitta. And the bodhicitta is said to that the mind that is aimed at awakening wisdom and compassion for the benefit of all sentient beings. So that is the very essence of our creativity. And we all have this as a seed within our own heart. However we choose to phrase it or whatever name we give it, this is the true creativity in each one of us. Now, in this painting of Hilma af Klint, is an abstract version of the 2 swans, the swan in and out of time. And for Hilma af Klint, she says that creativity starts with an abstraction that we're all too familiar with. When we study the secret doctrine or any other metaphysical idea, it starts with an abstraction. We scratch our head, we meditate upon it, we ponder upon it, and somehow, for each one of us, we have to find a way to make that abstraction into a form perceptible on this plane. So here we see the 2 swans in and out of time that now has become visible on this plane. So in that sense, you could say that creativity for us as students of theosophy or esoteric teaching has to do with making the esoteric teaching not only understandable, but applicable. And in this, each one of us have our specific creative way of doing and sharing this. And in other words, we could say that we take high metaphysical ideas, we have to meditate upon them, but we also have to put them into practice, using them as a basis for true ethical living. I think that most of us would probably agree with Paracelsus when he says that everything is part of one universal creative effort. The macrocosm and man, the microcosm, are truly one. Therefore, it has been said that man is the perfect number, number 10, as the Roman numeral X here is showing the joining of spirit and matter. And we have the most sacred of symbols here, the tetractys, which has 10 dots in it. And we can view these 10 dots as the unlimited creative potentials in each one of us. Now, if we go to dictionary, an ordinary dictionary, we have different definitions of what creativity is. We say that it is the use of imagination or original ideas to create something. But it's also to be able to make connections between ideas, circumstances, and beings. And here in this definition, we have three very occult tenets. We have imagination, which we in theosophy use a little bit different than we do in everyday life. Imagination is more the image-making power being used in a creative and conscious way. Whereas when we use the image-making power, we often do it in the direction of fantasy and a little bit, this and that. We have the original ideas, which ideally are the archetypal ideas. The way a universe unfolds is the same way that a human being unfolds in a spiritual process. And it's also the same way that an idea becomes a thought, which is then put into words and which is then put into action. And to be able to make connection is a crucial thing on a spiritual path. We know when we study theosophical literature that we are advised to really apply the law of correspondence as an analogy. That is to see that what happens in the greater universe is also happening on a smaller scale in my own daily life. And when we study in this way, we develop the power to see connections. We see connections between ideas. That is, we can see how the same archetypal ideas are showing themselves in the different traditions of wisdom, religious traditions, philosophical traditions. But it's also power that when we start to develop it, we start to see the connections in the circumstances in our own daily life. And we have a very dear student in our group, Inger, who expressed it beautifully. She said it's the capacity to see the small miracles of life. And we have all noticed it, those moments of synchronicity, where all of a sudden the connections become apparent to us. And as we train ourselves to see that and to perceive that in everyday life, we will also start to be more prone to see all the interconnectedness that actually are there behind the forms between all sentient beings. But certainly, we could say that there are different levels of creativity. And they seem somehow to be related to our different points of identification. And what is meant by that? Well, what do I identify with? Do I identify myself just with a personality? Or am I something more? Am I a spiritual being? Or is I a ray of the absolute universal consciousness? And we can see, depending on what level that we act from, we will use different aspects of the mind. And to extremely simplify things, hopefully, we can share three main points of identification, which then uses three different levels of the mind and therefore has access to three different levels of creativity. The most universal aspect of our mind is that which makes us feel to be I am. You could say it's the highest form of ahamkara or egoship. And this is, of course, the universal consciousness. We have it as an exemplification of the Jnani Buddhas, who with their very being unfold and uphold the whole universe. This universal consciousness diversifies itself into the different rays, which is each one of us, and which gives rise to the feeling of I am I. It has that sense of identity that is there from the beginning of life to the end of life, but also from life to life to life. The uninterrupted current that carries the consciousness from one life to the other. And in this type of, you could say, creativity or use of the mind, the creativity is used to create unity, to make things work according to universal principles. It is the capacity to see both the diversity and unity at once. And then we have the point of identification, which is the most familiar to us, where we feel that I am this and this person, I am the persona. And here the creativity can be at times quite muddled up. Very often it's directed by our senses. We smell a nice smell and then we immediately get an image of a cup of coffee or cinnamon bun or whatever it is. You see my weaknesses here. And so, you know, we form an image and it becomes the creativity to go and get this and that thing. Mind is more or less constituted of memories, characteristics, traits, skandhas from previous lives and this life. And it's a very type of conditioned mind. And in order to make the personal mind more, you could say, porous, so we can use the creative energies in a more spontaneous way, we have somehow to stop the modifications of the lower mind. And we can all see, you know, persons that come up with fantastic inventions, fantastic pieces of music or art, and they all describe it as moments of inspiration from something higher, something deeper inside themselves. And one of my pages the other day gave, I thought, a good definition of what personal creativity is. She said it is the capacity to be able to perceive opportunities where other people see problems. And I thought, what a beautiful way of approaching karma, the law of action and reaction, to instead of saying, you know, like, oh, here something is punishing or here is a reward, to just see it as opportunities. And you know that the first step in occultism is a perfect reliance on the law of karma. So if we could just meet every circumstances, every challenge in our life by just that what we need and want for our, you know, for our development, then we would find that the creativity of the more individual aspect will start to flow, will feel more spontaneous, will become more humoristic. Life becomes a little bit more of a play, not so stagnant as it can become otherwise in the personal consciousness. So if we then take a look at the lower mind, we all know that it's called the monkey mind for a reason. You know, it jumps from one branch, the past, to another branch, the future. It jumps from pleasure to pain, from likes to dislike, from fears to hope. And in all sense, you could say that it's very sense-based. It's, you know, it takes us in one direction and then another direction. So we use the mind and we use the creative capacity in the lower mind as well. Sorry, okay. But we have to be able to see that in order to use the lower mind in a good way, because the moment we step on the spiritual path, we make sure that all our effort will intensify the power of our mind. So like it is said in the voice of the silence, we have to be aware of the dangers of the lower idis or the creative forces. And there is a danger of misusing those creative forces. And we may think often about this in connection with astral phenomena, clairvoyant, and so forth. But we tend to forget that one of our students here, Frederick, pointed out some time ago that the lower creative powers is also what we call fake news. The way we manipulate whole societies into beliefs of something that is totally fake. And, you know, to be perfectly honest, if we point the fingers towards ourselves, we can probably see that we all fall prey to that. Just let's think if someone has offended us and we want to tell that, you know, what has happened to a dear friend. Don't we all have a tendency to spice it up a little bit, to gain a little bit more of empathy in the whole thing? Or maybe if we have something that we really want, you know, our personality really want And if we are good with words, we're probably good in trying to convey that and to get our own way, so to speak. So true creativity has to do with an education of the mind through the guidance of the heart. And true creativity in that sense is to transform passion into compassion. It is to liberate the mind from the dominance of the senses. Of course, we should use the senses, but not being dominated by them. So we come to the point, what is the creative mind? Well, the creative mind is a mind that has a balance between flexibility and stability. A mind that only has stability tends to become rigid, and the rigidity starts to crystallize into dogmatism, into fanaticism. And we can all see what a political and religious fanaticism does to the world. Now, if the mind is only flexible, it will be a little bit wishy-washy. It will be here, and then we'll stay for a moment there, and then we'll, go somewhere else. So it becomes a mind that is not so reliable. So the balance between flexibility and stability is important. The flexibility to be open to take in other views than our own, to take in new ideas, to see new perspective, and the stability to be able to maintain one's motive of the Kamadevic impulse through all these differentiations. So in order to make our mind more creative, we have to be able to maintain our motive. We have to be able to use our image-making power consciously, and we have to set the spiritual will into action when it has become freed of the personal desires. And for this, we have to turn towards the higher siddhis, these true creative forces, the Dhyanibuddhic forces, the paramitas, as described in The Voice of the Silence in the third fragment. And the moment we start to try and approach those spiritual forces, we start to step onto the path. And in order to be able to stay in this state of consciousness, which we call the path, we need 7 golden keys to unlock the portals of true creativity. The first golden key is what sets the motive. It's crucial. Any composer who wants to compose a piece of music needs to strike a keynote, just like Helena Blavatsky struck a keynote for the whole esoteric teaching to unfold for our benefit. So the first is that Kamadevic impulse of charity and love immortal. And of course, we know that each of these paramitas have at least 7 different levels. So what we perceive as charity and love in the beginning may not be the same as we continue on the path, which is the process. The second paramita is harmony in thought, word, and act. And here we have the image-making power. We have to be able to dress up an idea in an image. That is the thought. We have to be able to maintain the thought. We have to be able to express it in words, and we have to act it out as an act. So when a person has a harmony in thought, word, and act, there is no more room for karmic action in that sense. And we have inspirational persons throughout history. We have Mahatma Gandhi, like was mentioned before. We have Mother Teresa. We have Nelson Mandela. We have the present Dalai Lama. The reason that what they say has such an impact is because they have this harmony in thought, word, and act that we have to strive for. Shanti is the third key, and is patience. And patience isn't just about wanting to have things done quickly. Patience is foremost of all to be able to have stability of the mind. It has to be a certain point of one-pointedness that stops the mind from all these different modifications. And this, you could say, is the preparation for the next golden key, which is vairagya, equanimity and discernment, the discernment capacity to discern what is real and what is false. We sometimes call it the higher indifference, but it is that, you could say, key that helps us to transcend dislikes and likes. And of course, It's called the higher type of indifference, not because we should be cold and indifferent, of course, but because we shouldn't attach ourselves. We shouldn't be bound up by all what the senses create. It's an interesting golden key, because Vairagya is just in the middle. It's the tipping point, the balancing point. And if we see here, we can see that Dana, Shila, Shanti, the first three paramitas, are kind of a preparation. When we come to Vairagya, to transcend the polarity, this is where the personal consciousness starts to merge into the individual consciousness. And when Virya, the next paramita, when the senses are in check, when we have liberated the lower consciousness from all its desires, then the spiritual will be free from those personal desires. And here is where the true creativity starts, to become co-operators and co-creators in nature. And if we are able to maintain that, like spiritual beings are being able to maintain it consciously, we get glimpses of it. Because this leads to that one-pointedness, that when we live our life, we are perfectly present in everything we do. We do things with awareness. It is like we are in, you could say, in a continuous state of meditation. And for those beings that have the capacity to realize that, then it flowers up in prajna, the wisdom of compassion. Here you have the whole circle come round from that original Kamadevic impulse that starts us off on the path and then merges us in as enlightened beings in the wisdom of compassion with the realized bodhisattvahood. So to conclude this talk, I would just like to end with this slide and with a quote from Krishna in Bhagavad Gita, which I think is the ultimate divine creativity, when he says, I established this entire universe with a single portion of myself and yet remain separate. And this is exactly what we have to do. We have this impulse within our own heart. And we, each one of us, each in our own creative way, have to establish our own universe. And still we have to have one part that remains separate, the witness position. And you know how it says in the Bible that in order to be able to enter the kingdom of heaven, we have to re-become to that childlike state again. And if you look at the very small child, and you see before their mind becomes too conditioned by previous skandhas, when they are still curious and fresh, they try and they try and they try because they want to explore. And that is the way that we also need to be in order to explore our true creativity. Thank you.